In 2008, in the suburban heart of Texas, Sarah and Mark lived a life that appeared flawless from the outside. Sarah was in her late 30s, a devoted wife, and a mother of two. From a young age, Sarah had seen marriage as a sacred bond. She had always dreamed of the day she'd become a wife and mother, envisioning a life of love, devotion, and unwavering support for her family. Marriage had come early for her, and she had accepted it with wide-eyed faith, believing her husband would be her partner in all things through all stages of life. Sarah hadn't received much education. Growing up in a small, conservative town, her family had placed higher importance on her becoming a good, God-fearing woman than pursuing a career. In her world, success wasn't measured in degrees or titles, but in the strength of her family and home. She'd poured herself into that role wholeheartedly, taking pride in being there for her children and her husband. Mark, on the other hand, had always been ambitious, with dreams that extended beyond the confines of their small community. He was a corporate manager, making steady advancements in his career. His life had always been about reaching the next level, moving forward, and climbing higher. His work was demanding, often taking him away from home for long hours, but he found satisfaction in his success. It made him feel strong, accomplished, and worthy of respect. Mark had been Sarah's first love, her first experience of the world outside her own family. At first he seemed perfect, charming, successful, and mature. She admired him deeply, looking up to him not just as her husband, but as a guide, someone she believed was more worldly and knowledgeable than she was. Over time, though, subtle shifts began to appear in Mark's behavior. He started to view Sarah's simplicity as a flaw, something that made her less of an equal partner and more of a silent figure in the background. He would dismiss her opinions, brush aside her thoughts, and even question her abilities in front of others. Sarah, humble by nature, took it all without complaint. She held tight to her faith, convinced that a devoted wife should stand by her husband no matter the trials. When Mark suggested hiring a young European au pair to help around the house, Sarah agreed without question. Mark framed it as a necessary support due to his overwhelming work responsibilities. Although Sarah had managed without help before, she didn't protest. Isabelle, a 22-year-old from France, arrived a few weeks later, filling the household with her youthful energy and charm. Tall and striking with an easy smile, she quickly became a favorite in the home. She was efficient, always cheerful, and took to the children with ease, often entertaining them with stories about her travels and experiences in Europe. Sarah was grateful, feeling fortunate to have such help and companionship. But Mark's demeanor changed, almost imperceptibly. He began to come home earlier, claiming he was checking in on things, or making sure Isabelle was adjusting. Sarah was accustomed to his late hours, so his sudden attentiveness was surprising, though she thought little of it. She reasoned that Mark, with his demanding career, was simply taking an interest in the well-being of the household. Yet, as weeks turned into months, subtle signs started to emerge. Mark and Isabelle seemed unusually at ease with each other, often laughing together over inside jokes or lingering in the kitchen longer than necessary after meals. Mark would ask Isabelle about her day, something he rarely did with Sarah. He complimented her cooking, a task Sarah had always done herself. Even in their casual interactions, Sarah began to sense a closeness between them that felt out of place. Mark's work schedule also grew increasingly erratic. He began mentioning longer work trips and business dinners that seemed to come up with unusual frequency. At first, Sarah brushed it aside, focusing on maintaining her role and caring for their children. But small inconsistencies began to bother her. There were times he'd come home late, smelling faintly of perfume, or with his shirt hastily buttoned. On one such evening, after another vague explanation about a late-night meeting, Sarah noticed a single long hair, light and unmistakably Isabel's, caught on his jacket collar. She hesitated, unsure whether to question him, feeling a deep internal conflict. Mark had always been her compass, her guiding star, and the idea of doubt felt disloyal, almost as though it were a betrayal of the marriage vows she held sacred. Her mind spun with conflicting thoughts and emotions. On one hand, she was the dutiful, trusting wife who saw it as her role to be unwaveringly supportive. On the other, she couldn't ignore the signs, the small but significant changes in his routine and behavior. Sarah tried to dismiss it, telling herself that perhaps her suspicions were a result of stress or exhaustion from the demands of running the household. But her heart couldn't ignore the mounting unease. One quiet afternoon, as she was folding laundry, she noticed a new message pop up on Mark's phone, which he had left on the bed. It was from Isabel, and the content wasn't overtly inappropriate, but there was a familiarity in the tone that unsettled her. She felt her chest tighten as she read the words, a small knot of anxiety forming. Sarah put the phone down, convincing herself it was nothing, that she was just being paranoid. But the seed of doubt had been planted, and no amount of reassurance could fully erase it. The following days only heightened her suspicions. Isabel began taking days off under the guise of exploring the area, but Sarah noticed that these outings often coincided with Mark's absences. She brushed it off each time, unwilling to confront a truth that would shatter the foundation of her life. The signs were there, subtle and unsettling, but she clung to the hope that she was mistaken, that her faith in her husband was not misplaced. In this state of quiet turmoil, Sarah continued with her daily routines, striving to be the wife and mother she had always envisioned. Her heart ached with the weight of her doubts, and the signs of a possible betrayal lingered, small but undeniable. The tension simmered beneath the surface of her days, and as much as she tried to ignore it, she knew a part of her could never fully forget those clues, the stray hair, the lingering glances, the messages left unseen. It was an unassuming night in late autumn, sometime in 2009, when Sarah's life changed forever. She was in the quiet refuge of the laundry room, folding Mark's shirts with her usual care, thinking of the next day's tasks. But as she smoothed her hands over the crisp fabric of his favorite suit jacket, she found something unusual. Tucked into the pocket, slightly hidden by the dark fabric, was a white shirt with a faint yet unmistakable mark of lipstick smeared across the collar. Her heart skipped, her hands hovering over the stain as her mind tried to make sense of it. Sarah wanted to believe there was an innocent explanation. Her husband, the man she had trusted and followed for years, couldn't be unfaithful. He simply couldn't. But the stain was like a scar on her own heart, something she couldn't unsee, a small wound that refused to heal. That night, she slept restlessly, unable to ignore the troubling thoughts spiraling in her mind. In the following days, Sarah found herself watching Mark closely, her heart filled with a mixture of love, confusion, and dread. For the first time, she noticed how carefully he checked his phone, the way he took calls in hushed tones, or left the room when he texted. She had never been one to pry, respecting his privacy, as she believed a good wife should. But her intuition gnawed at her, whispering that she was missing something important. The seed of doubt had been planted, and as much as she tried to ignore it, it only grew. A few weeks later, she made a decision that felt foreign, even wrong. While Mark was away on one of his late nights, she quietly accessed his computer, searching through his emails and messages. Her heart pounded with each click, dreading what she might find, but also needing to know the truth. She scrolled through emails, feeling a pang each time she saw a familiar name pop up: Isabel. There were messages that, at first glance, seemed innocent, perhaps even platonic. Yet, as she read further, subtle hints of intimacy and affection emerged. She found herself piecing together dates and times, patterns and conversations. Her world seemed to tilt as the truth became undeniable. Mark was indeed having an affair with Isabel. Each word she read deepened her disbelief, the betrayal cutting through her trust like a blade. She felt the weight of every unspoken lie, every stolen moment between them, each one eroding the foundation of her marriage. In the days that followed her discovery, Sarah felt numb. She went through her routines, her actions automatic as her mind reeled. She had always seen herself as a dedicated wife, someone who had sacrificed so much for her family. But now, she realized, her loyalty had been taken for granted. Mark had reduced her trust and devotion to nothing more than a weakness to be exploited. And Isabel, the young woman she had welcomed into their home, had broken her heart in a way she had never imagined. Yet Sarah did not confront Mark. She spent sleepless nights wrestling with the pain, but she knew she needed to approach this betrayal carefully. On a brisk November morning, she made a quiet decision. She would not let anger consume her. Instead, she would protect herself and her children. And ultimately, she would expose the truth. She decided that, if Mark could betray her so completely, he didn't deserve her honesty or her immediate reaction. Over the next 11 months, Sarah began the painstaking process of planning her next steps. Her first visit was to a lawyer, discreetly arranged so Mark would never find out. She learned about her rights, about how to protect her assets, and the home that had been gifted to her by her father. Armed with knowledge and a newfound sense of empowerment, she crafted a plan. Sarah knew she couldn't let the children bear the full brunt of Mark's betrayal, so she spoke to them delicately, explaining things in a way that allowed them to understand without casting Mark in a cruel light. Her purpose was not to turn them against their father, but rather to prepare them, to let them know the reality of his actions. During this period, Sarah began to transform in subtle yet undeniable ways. She no longer sought Mark's approval in small decisions around the house. For the first time, she redecorated the living room with new colors and furniture of her choosing, relishing the small act of independence. She also began to reconnect with friends she hadn't seen in years, meeting them for coffee or joining them for gatherings Mark would never have approved of. He remained blissfully ignorant, assuming Sarah was simply keeping herself busy, content in her usual routines. He still viewed her as the humble, docile wife, too simple to question or challenge him. As the months passed, Sarah saw through Mark's every action, his every attempt to maintain appearances. He continued his late nights, his long phone calls, his subtle glances at Isabel. He had no idea that Sarah knew everything, that she was patiently waiting for the right moment to reveal the truth. Then, as summer faded into fall, Sarah saw her opportunity: the upcoming family reunion. Mark was always proud of his family's gatherings, a chance to showcase his perfect life to extended relatives and friends. It would be the perfect setting, a place where he would be surrounded by people who admired him, unaware that his life was about to unravel. Sarah quietly arranged for Isabel to attend the reunion, presenting it as a favor to have additional help during the event. By the time the family reunion approached, Sarah's mind was set, her heart steeled. She was no longer the passive, humble wife Mark believed her to be. Instead, she was a woman who had found her own strength, determined to reclaim her life on her own terms. Each day, leading up to the reunion, felt like a silent victory, her quiet strength building as she moved closer to the moment she would reveal the truth. The long-anticipated family reunion was finally here, and Sarah had planned every detail with precision. She had hosted many of these gatherings before, usually deferring to Mark's preferences and ensuring everything was up to his high standards. But this year, there was a quiet yet undeniable shift. She was the orchestrator of this day, down to the seating arrangement, the menu, and even the hidden touches only she knew were in place. Her heart was steady, her focus unwavering. Today would be the day everything changed. As the evening progressed, laughter and cheerful conversations filled the room. Relatives clinked glasses and shared stories, trading memories and light-hearted gossip. Mark was in his element, as always, commanding attention with his stories and witticisms. He played the role of the perfect husband, the family man who had it all, blissfully unaware of the plans quietly unfolding around him. Sarah watched him, a calm satisfaction in her eyes, waiting for the right moment to make her move. Toward the end of dinner, just as the night began to lull, and everyone settled into their seats for dessert, Sarah rose to her feet with a gentle smile. She raised her glass and addressed the room, thanking everyone for their presence. She then turned to Mark, acknowledging him for his devotion to their family, words that she layered with just enough irony to spark a flicker of unease in his expression. He glanced around, his brow furrowing slightly, as if trying to gauge if anyone else had noticed the subtle edge in her tone. She then mentioned Isabel, casually yet purposefully, complimenting her support and her helpfulness in Mark's life and the household. She expressed her gratitude for all the extra time and effort Isabel had put in. Isabel, seated a few seats down, smiled awkwardly, her cheeks pinking under the sudden attention. Mark's face tensed, and his hand shifted uncomfortably on the table, a dawning realization settling over him. He glanced at Sarah, his eyes widening, and in that instant, he seemed to understand that his wife might know more than he had assumed. But before he could react, Sarah continued with graceful poise, explaining to everyone that she had prepared a slideshow to celebrate the beautiful moments they had shared over the years. Sarah walked over to the television, connecting the laptop that held the slideshow she had carefully compiled. The first few images flickered onto the screen, showing sweet family moments, the children as toddlers, holiday trips, birthdays, and anniversaries. The family smiled and nodded, touched by the sentimental display, while Mark visibly relaxed, thinking perhaps he'd misjudged her tone. The room filled with murmurs of fond memories and appreciative sighs. But then the images began to shift. The photos moved from innocent family gatherings to more recent shots that seemed out of place. Mark and Isabel standing too close in the kitchen, a lingering hand on her shoulder, an intimate glance exchanged when they thought no one was looking. As the images continued, subtle gestures of affection became more blatant, moving into photos clearly taken from hidden angles, capturing the couple in compromising poses. Each new image revealed more, peeling back the facade Mark had so carefully constructed. Gasps filled the room, rippling through the crowd like a wave. Family members exchanged horrified glances, their shock mingling with a sense of awkward amusement. Whispers spread, some stifling laughter at the sheer audacity of it all. Mark's parents, seated near the front, looked as though they had seen a ghost, their faces drained of color, mouths hanging open in disbelief. His siblings shifted uncomfortably, darting their eyes between the screen and Mark, not knowing where to look. Mark's face turned an alarming shade of red. His jaw clenched as he sat frozen in his seat, unable to react. Isabel's expression shifted from confusion to horror, her hand covering her mouth as she tried to comprehend the magnitude of the situation. She instinctively began to rise from her seat, desperate to leave the room and escape the scrutiny. But Sarah, prepared for this moment, walked over and with a calm smile handed Isabel a suitcase she had packed the night before. The gesture was both generous and merciless, a final parting gift, wrapped in the same politeness Sarah had always shown. As Isabel attempted to gather herself and make a quick exit, the room erupted with murmurs, some hushed laughter, and a flurry of shocked whispers. Mark's elderly aunt crossed herself, mumbling in disbelief, while other relatives exchanged scandalized glances. Some tried to stifle chuckles, too amused by the unexpected drama. Sarah remained composed, watching the reactions with a quiet satisfaction. The years of loyalty and patience, the quiet sacrifice, and the months of painful planning had led to this moment of vindication, and she felt an inner strength she hadn't known before. In the days that followed, Mark was left speechless and humiliated. He attempted to confront Sarah, but his arguments were weak, desperate attempts to salvage his pride. She had anticipated this and had prepared herself to handle it with calm detachment. She revealed to him that the house, their family home, actually belonged to her family, a gift from her father when they were first married. Her voice steady and resolute, she told Mark that he had until the end of the month to pack his belongings and leave. For the first time, Mark looked at her with a mixture of shock and something akin to respect, as though he were seeing her true strength for the first time. Gone was the meek, compliant woman he thought he had married. In her place stood a powerful, confident woman who had reclaimed control of her life. He tried to reason with her, to appeal to her old self, but Sarah remained resolute, unmoved by his attempts to manipulate her. The children, initially hurt and confused by the separation, began to understand and appreciate their mother's resilience. Sarah was open with them, explaining what she could without turning them against their father, letting them form their own understanding of the events. They saw her strength, her quiet courage, and it became a source of inspiration for them. Gradually, the hurt gave way to admiration, as they saw how she was building a new life, not only for herself, but for them as well. In the months that followed, Sarah adjusted to life without Mark, a life she had not chosen, but had embraced with dignity and strength. She took steps toward her own dreams, enrolling in a local college to pursue the education she had once set aside. The small victories in her classes, the independence of choosing her own path, filled her with a newfound sense of purpose. Her children began to see her not just as their mother, but as a powerful example of resilience and courage, a woman who had been tested and had emerged stronger. Sarah found fulfillment in her new independence, embracing her future with an open heart. The memories of betrayal faded into the background, replaced by the possibilities of a life lived on her terms. She was no longer simply Mark's wife or the mother of his children. She was finally Sarah, whole, complete, and more powerful than ever before. As the family disperses, some of them now whispering admiration for Sarah's clever handling of the situation, she watches Mark's car drive off for the last time. There's a small private smile on her face, hinting that this new chapter might just be the beginning of a much more fulfilling life. It reminds us of another very clever woman in an interesting case we have. The case where a wife exposed her husband's affair with her boss at a family reunion, and it ends deadly.